The topic of my research is the effect of throwing a baseball on endochondral ossification. Hello, my name is Nathan Doe. I am a senior at Jefferson and Pequannock Township High School, and I'm a part of the Morris County Allied Health Program. Endochondral ossification is the body's process of converting a cartilage model into a bony skeletal system. This process occurs through all bones of the body except the flat bones of the face, clavicles, and some of the cranial bones. Before endochondral ossification occurs, around the 6th or 7th week of embryonic life, the body is composed of chondrocytes in a hyaline cartilage model. At this point in time, the cartilage is vascular, meaning blood vessels are present and can readily repair any damage to the model. Endochondral ossification begins when chondrocytes begin to die, leaving a small opening in the middle of the model. This damage signals blood vessels to enter the cartilage, convert some perichondrium to periosteum, and leave osteoblasts to form a periosteal bone collar around the middle of the model. This process of cartilage death and bone formation continues to occur as osteoblasts enter and create bone while osteoclasts destroy cartilage. This leaves a primary ossification center in the middle of the diaphysis. This space in the middle of the model turns into bone marrow, while osteoclasts and osteoblasts continue to destroy cartilage and build bone towards the epiphyses of the bone. Once the entire cartilage is replaced by bone, there are only a few areas remaining still composed of hyaline cartilage: the articular cartilage on the articular surface and the epiphyseal plates on either end of the bone. After the initial process is complete and the hyaline cartilage is replaced, endochondral ossification continues at the epiphyseal or growth plates. The growth plates functioning properly depends on the balance between chondrocyte proliferation and chondrocyte death. Highly mitotic chondrocytes in the proliferating zone of the epiphyseal plate create chondrocytes, which push the resting cartilage upward and increase the length of the bone diaphysis. As the epiphyseal plate moves towards the ends of the bone, osteoclasts still destroy cartilage in the bottom zone of the epiphyseal plate, paving the way for osteoblasts to deposit new bone, which lengthens the overall bone. This process of bone elongation continues until around the age of 25, when the skeletal system is considered fully developed. Throughout this process, the death of chondrocytes did not signal blood vessels to come perform repairs due to the presence of anti-angiogenesis factor, or AAGF. AAGF is a compound that prevents blood vessels from forming and is present during the teenage years. A combination of being the only part of the hyaline cartilage model not replaced by bone and the absence of blood vessels to provide nutrients and repair damages leaves the epiphyseal plate as the weakest part of the skeleton. Being weaker than even the surrounding tendons and ligaments, this causes the epiphyseal plate to be a common location for injuries. Due to the lack of bone strength and due to lack of bone and strength in the epiphyseal plate, and overuse of the glenohumeral joint can lead to damage. The most common name of proximal humeral epiphysiolysis is Little League shoulder, due to its prevalence in youth baseball players. During the overhead throwing motion, the proximal humeral epiphyseal plate undergoes repetitive microtrauma. The predisposed weak epiphyseal plate of a youth baseball player, combined with the repetitive overhead throwing of a baseball, leads to an accumulation of damage to the epiphyseal cartilage, or Little League shoulder. Little League shoulder is a common issue among youth baseball, with 4.9% of all players being affected by the epiphyseal plate damage. With the weak epiphyseal plate not closing until the age of 25, and the throwing motion being one of the most common and repetitive movements for a youth baseball player, the prevalence of proximal humeral epiphysiolysis is essentially inevitable. In this study, the relationship between throwing a baseball, damage to the epiphyseal cartilage, and how it influences endochondral ossification will be discussed. My hypothesis for this study is that the damage that throwing a baseball does to the epiphyseal plate will disrupt endochondral ossification and create a difference in the bone growth compared to the non-throwing arm. The two assumptions being made throughout this research is that all information found in the meta-analysis is reliable from database sources, and all graphs and data pulled from previous studies are credible. The main databases used throughout this study include EBSCO, Gale, and Google Scholar, with two of the most referenced sources being National Center for Biotechnology Information, or NCBI, PubMed, and Radiological Society of North America, or RSNA. The procedure for this study is to use databases and other reliable sources to compile information in a meta-analytic study. Data and graphs. In this table, the pathological changes involving the proximal humeral physes in baseball players from multiple studies was accumulated. In essentially every study, the radiographic change that was present was either physial widening or widening of the proximal humeral growth plate. These accumulated studies go to show how prevalent epiphyseal plate widening is in youth baseball players. As I stated before, whenever there is vasculature in the cartilage, nutrients are readily provided and any damage to the model can be repaired. Throughout the endochondral bone growth process, the vasculature at the metaphyseal and epiphyseal ends of the feces remains separated by the resting/terminal, proliferative, and hypertrophic zones of the feces. Whenever microtrauma like that created from repetitive overhead throwing affects the epiphyseal plate, the epiphyseal and metaphyseal vessels begin to communicate with one another. Data analysis. In this picture, the communication between epiphyseal and metaphyseal vessels is present. In bone A, this represents the bone from the age up until 18 months, gaining nutrients and leaving the epiphyseal plate. Bone B represents the bone from 18 months up until the ages of 16, 17, when the growth plate closes. This is the bone that my study is focused around. You can see in this bone that there is no transvisial vessels present. Lastly, in bone C, from age 17 and on, there is communication between epiphyseal and metaphyseal vessels, and the growth plate has fully fused. Anytime there's connection between the two vessels, bone bridges form, which closes the epiphyseal plate. Here you can see an X-ray and CT scan. This is from the epiphyseal and metaphyseal vessels prematurely communicating and leaving bone bridges, which can be seen in the picture. Repetitive overhead throwing of a baseball can lead to microtrauma of the epiphyseal plate. This is commonly referred to as Little League shoulder and is very prevalent in youth baseball. The microtrauma causes transphyseal communication between the epiphyseal and metaphyseal blood vessels. This is the process that occurs to close the growth plate and cease bone growth. But when it occurs to a child prematurely, it creates bone bridges, as you can see in that picture. These bone bridges along the epiphyseal plate alter endochondral ossification and prevent it from functioning properly and extending the bone. Changes to the bone that this can create include angular deformity and complete stoppage of bone growth, which leaves a limb that is shorter than the other. For further research, some more research ideas that could be performed in the future include ways that bone bridging can be prevented, ways to treat bone bridging, and alternate ways the body can respond to stress to the epiphyseal plate other than vascularization. Thank you for watching my presentation.